The mission of the team was to help women-owned micro-enterprises in the least developed countries scale and find access to international supply chains.
Okay.
So when we say micro-enterprises, we're not talking, startups coming out of Y Combinator. We're talking, an individual jewelry maker sitting in Papua New Guinea.
Really? Wow.
So pretty incredible women who we find it difficult growing businesses and accessing funding in a really healthy ecosystem that we have in London. That looks incredibly different in places like Papua New Guinea. And I thought, shoppers want to discover new products and brands. They want unique pieces. They don't want to wear the same dress as someone else to a wedding. There's nothing worse than that.
Yeah.
There's something there. And I started to speak to smaller designers, medium-sized independent designers, and they said, we want a platform that gives us proper visibility. We don't get lost in a global luxury product catalog of every item out there. I can't imagine doing anything else. Like I truly, and I'm not just saying this for the podcast, I truly love my business. I love my job. I don't want a different job as well. And I feel like we're just getting started.
My name is Claudia Green, and this is She Did That, the podcast shining a spotlight on remarkable women who are breaking barriers and proving that greatness knows no gender. From female founders who have raised millions of pounds, the investors changing the landscape as we know it, to survivors of tragedy who have achieved the amazing, and many more. We will share the stories of these incredible women who will inspire and empower you. In order to support us and these women, please subscribe on your viewing or listening channel of choice so we can continue our mission of sharing the stories that should and need to be heard.
As far as girl bosses go, this lady certainly fits the bill. She graduated from Stanford University. She's worked for Goldman Sachs, UBS. She has worked for the UN. Off the back of a £2.8 million fundraise, she has launched one of the most exciting marketplaces, curating brands and designers from every corner of the globe. She is taking on a market which has previously not been infiltrated so much. She's a trailblazer and she has only just got started. Today, I have Nina Briance of Cult Mia. Welcome, Nina. Nina, thank you so much for being here.
It is such a pleasure.
I'm very excited to hear because I am I'm not a fashionista. I'm a wannabe fashionista. But I have been going on Cult Mia for a long time and I've been looking at all the stuff and I absolutely love it. And then I Googled to find you and I was like, oh my God, she lives in London. I can get her on my podcast. I was so happy because I thought you'd be in America. So let's go all the way back in time. Born in Mexico?
Born in the US, actually.
Born in the US. Okay.
Mexican parents.
Okay.
Moved over right after they got married.
Yeah.
And I spent most of my childhood in the US, went to school in Switzerland when I was 11, came back for university. And since I've been at uni, family moved back to Mexico. So that has been home ever since.
Got you. And university, you went to Stanford?
Yeah, went to Stanford.
So you were pretty good at school then?
Studied a lot.
That's a big achievement. I hear it's quite hard to get into Stanford.
It's getting harder. I interview for the university for the UK applicants now.
Yeah.
And every student I meet applying who's 16, 17 is essentially saving the world, curing cancer, setting up charities. I'm sure I wouldn't get in if I applied again now.
Oh, I'm sure you would have. I definitely wouldn't have. So, and what was it like growing up in the US versus you've lived here now for 10 years?
Yeah.
11 years.
Love both. I would say my heart is split, and interestingly enough, my husband is half English, half American. So I feel like we very much kind of have that commonality. We try and spend as much time as possible in the US, in particular over the summer. I would say we now have a little baby girl, so traveling has become a little bit more difficult.
Yeah.
It requires a lot more planning. Right now, London is home. Never say never, but potentially we'll move back at some stage in the future.
We'll see how the general election goes and what happens to this country.
That is a big one. Both elections, US and
Both
UK,
elections,
I think.
and both look a bit disastrous. So maybe you should go to Mexico.
Yeah, maybe.
I don't know what the government's like in Mexico, though.
Not much better.
No,
but at least there's nice beaches.
There's nice beaches. Okay, there's sunshine. Okay. Yeah. So I'm interested because when we first had our call on Hangouts and I told you to summarize your experience, and I was like typing, I was like, oh my God. What has this woman not done? I was so impressed. I called my friend after and I was like, I need to tell you about this girl. She's done everything. Tell me about, so you went to, what did you study at Stanford?
I studied international political economy, so politics and economics.
Okay. Maybe you could be the president.
One day.
It's better than Trump or
Biden.
My
goodness. Never say never again.
And then I remember you telling me about your first little side hustle. Tell me a bit more about that.
Yeah. So I was 19, early days on campus at Stanford, and I found that students were looking for more flexible dining options. Very few students had cars, so it felt really natural to connect Palo Alto restaurants with hungry Stanford students on campus. It was a very, very early Uber Eats or Deliveroo. Got a few friends to drive around to pick up orders, but at 19, I didn't know how to scale the business outside of Stanford, but it definitely left me really hungry, literally. To set up my business, and I found it incredibly exciting building something from the ground up.
So you essentially got in there really before Deliveroo.
I did.
Will Shu actually should step aside.
I also think what I realized then as well was you need to love the business that you're building. And the reality was, yes, I didn't have the skills, but I also wasn't passionate enough about food delivery.
Yeah.
And I think that has been kind of a recurring theme in my trajectory. Like, what am I really excited to build? And that's caught me up.
You have a really entrepreneurial spirit though. Like, where did you get that from? Are your parents entrepreneurs?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I would say I'm the only entrepreneur in my family, actually. And I was pretty coached from a young age that I should probably study engineering like everyone in my family. And I should probably become a banker, a consultant, a lawyer, one of these more traditional corporate routes. The thinking has obviously changed a lot over the last decade, but came from more of a conservative family when it came to risk-taking with entrepreneurship and following a more kind of traditional corporate CV route. I think my entrepreneurial spirit comes from liking the challenge. I don't like routine. I like putting structure into a very unstructured environment. I like to problem solve. I have always been someone who, for whatever reason, performed better under, a ticking clock when I was taking a test. I remember cramming and absorbing so much information. And all of this to say, I think like in more perhaps constantly changing environments, I just found creativity. I found inspiration. I was able to push myself more. And that has allowed me to eventually set up my own business.
Yes, but you were in the corporate world for a while. So you left Stanford and then you went into banking straight away?
I did.
Okay.
I went
Goldman
straight.
Sachs?
I went straight in there.
You are a high achiever.
Just like mom and dad wanted.
Yeah, I bet they were proud.
And I learned a lot. I learned a huge amount, and I think it was a really important foundation to set up the rest of my career to date. The themes that I think I've seen throughout the different roles that I've had start with the resilience that you find working in investment banking. So I was at Goldman, I was at UBS. I think you also learn to be highly analytical. You learn to also work well in different types of client-facing situations, learn a lot about industries. I was focused on consumer businesses for a big chunk of my time there.
So very relevant.
Very relevant. And also I got a feel for the other side of the table, what investors look at businesses of quite a big range in terms of size and performance. So again, very, very foundational, and one of those building blocks that I have found to be an incredible base to kind of springboard off of.
What was it like, the sort of male to female ratio in investment banking?
So in my first team, so given the Mexican background, I was in the LATAM team at Goldman, and there were, I think, a total of 12 team members, only girl.
You were the only girl?
Yeah, only girl.
I get the sense you can hold your own, so you were probably okay. But why do you think there is such an imbalance?
Yeah, I think at least at the time, it was a very demanding work culture. I think at the time as well, fewer women potentially were applying for those types of roles. A bit of a kind of fraternity vibe is not for everyone. I powered through, but I'm not going to lie, it was difficult. I remember my whole team would go on team retreats to Ibiza, and I would sit out because I had nothing to do with, 11 men on a, work trip to Ibiza and myself at age 22.
Yeah.
So, I think a lot of it's playing the game, but also knowing when not to play the game and to kind of stay true to yourself.
Yeah.
Fast forward a few years, we're actually 12 right now at Coltmia. Interesting symmetry there.
Yeah.
And we're all women.
Okay, so you rebalanced that.
I think so. Couple years later.
I love that you got
completely different.
Was that
industry.
Intentional?
I wouldn't say intentional necessarily. I mean, I think we really enjoy the environment, but we have interviewed men and women for pretty much every role.
They just don't cut the mustard.
But we picked the best candidates, and so far the best candidates have been women.
Yeah.
I'm sure we will hire men eventually. Very open to it. But it's been a lot of fun being all girls so far.
Yeah, I bet. And particularly the industry, the fact that it is fashion, female fashion.
Getting inside the customer's, mind is really easy for the team.
Yeah, I bet. Yeah. So after you worked in banking, you had a really fascinating role with the UN. Can you tell me a bit more about that? Absolutely.
And my time at the UN, I would say, was the first light bulb moment that led to Coltmia, but we'll get to that eventually. I joined a team called Women in Trade within the International Trade Center. And the mission of the team was to help women-owned micro-enterprises in the least developed countries scale and find access to international supply chains.
Okay.
So when we say micro enterprises, we're not talking, startups coming out of Y Combinator. We're talking, an individual jewelry maker sitting in Papua New Guinea.
Really?
Wow. So pretty incredible women who we find it difficult growing businesses and accessing funding in a really healthy ecosystem that we have in London. That looks incredibly different in places like Papua New Guinea, Kenya,
are there any VCs
Peru,
in Papua New Guinea?
Absolutely not. And not just that, these women sometimes are trying to feed their families with lots of difficulty, lots of violence around them in the areas, so they're really trying to grow their businesses against all kinds of odds. And the Women in Trade team had a phenomenal, really important mission to lift these women up, lift up their communities. I wasn't around when the UN did this, but this team participated in the first ethical fashion show that showed here at London Fashion Week, bringing some of these really talented women from around the world and showcasing their work. Unfortunately, it didn't have the traction that we would have seen today because this was back, I think, in 2012.
Right.
So the industry was not that focused on sustainability back then.
No, now it's a big thing.
Now it's a focus.
I don't know if the word care is right, but people did. It wasn't on people's radars.
It wasn't on their radars.
No.
It wasn't on their radar. So I think the mission of that team was a little bit ahead of its time, but very much a huge, huge light bulb moment for me in terms of what value system should underpin a business that I would want to set up one day.
And has that influenced the way you run Cult Mia now? Like obviously you curate, the best pieces.
Yeah.
Does that mean you look pretty far and wide?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think the number now tallies up to 2,000 designers that we've looked at and evaluated their brand. When it comes to how we select them, we look at two core areas. So one would be everything you'd expect from a fashion brand: product quality, design, and so on. But the other is literally the values that underpin the brand. So we do a sustainable and ethical vetting process. We list designers that tick at least one of these boxes, if not more. So either they're environmentally sustainable, they're socially conscious, they're locally produced, so thinking about helping those local communities, or they're minority owned. So very much continuing the women in trades work through the selection criteria that we see on Cult Mia.
That's amazing. And then after you left the UN, you decided to go back to education. London Business School, was it?
Exactly.
I did a day course there.
On what?
It was a day course on entrepreneurship.
Okay.
And the whole morning was spent with a spreadsheet. I walked in and I was like, I'm going to walk out again. I don't think I can do this. This is not what I thought. But actually it was extremely, extremely helpful. But you studied there, I mean, was it 12 months you did?
24
months.
Yeah.
And was that solely around entrepreneurship and how you navigate foundership?
So I did the MBA and I did a concentration, they call it, in entrepreneurship.
Okay.
So within the MBA degree, I basically curated a curriculum that was all focused on entrepreneurship and really rounding out my skill set, because I had a good financial skill set. I had an interesting kind of strategic consulting skill set, but there's a lot more to running a business than those two pillars. So I took classes, with titles called managing change, organizational behavior, negotiations and bargaining. I'm trying to think, financing the entrepreneurial business.
Yeah.
So it was, I would say, an incredible experience. And especially when you start to have a business idea in mind and you apply it to the frameworks you're being taught in school, you use that as your case study as you go through all the different courses. You essentially graduate with an MBA, but also a fully fledged and hashed out idea with inputs from really smart peers in your class and professors. And you can kind of hit the ground running from there if you really want to.
So it's something you would recommend?
Absolutely. I think an MBA is fantastic if you want a year or two, depending on the type of program you select, to change careers, to build out a business, to widen your skill set. Where I don't think it makes as much sense to me personally is you come from, say, McKinsey, and then you go right back to McKinsey where you left off.
Yeah.
But I think when it's about making a pivot or a big transition, it's an incredible platform.
Yeah, absolutely. And you were working at the same time as that?
I was.
You were busy.
Well, you have more time as a student, I'd have to say.
Yeah, I don't remember.
Yeah. You definitely have time should you want to work on the side. I joined a company called Moda Operandi. For those of you who aren't familiar with Moda, they're the equivalent to Net-a-Porter or Farfetch based out of New York, so luxury e-commerce platform. I had always loved fashion personally. I was an avid online shopper, but I had never really figured out how that could be a career for me. And I thought, I'm doing my MBA. This is a space I love and I'm naturally gravitating towards. Let's see what I can learn. And going back to really being passionate about something, all of a sudden I found myself doing Moda work while I was listening to a lecture because I really, really was starting to become obsessed with the platform, with the customer proposition, with the designers that were listed. My husband would have to like shut my laptop at night because I just was, going crazy over all things Moda. And there we started to see that Moda did a really good job in discovering brands that were less known. That was a tiny, tiny portion of their product offering.
Because a lot of what they do is quite established designers.
I would say, they really do focus on the Gucci's, Oscar de la Renta type brands that, but those smaller brands were starting to perform as well as some of those bigger brands. Really? And I thought, shoppers want to discover new products and brands. They want unique pieces. They don't want to wear the same dress as someone else to a wedding. There's nothing worse than that.
Yeah.
There's something there. And I started to speak to smaller designers, medium-sized independent designers, and they said, we want a platform that gives us proper visibility. We don't get lost in a global luxury product catalog of every item out there. We're never going to rank above Gucci on a website. And should we have the opportunity to do so, it normally comes at a cost. So we have to pay for those placements, and we just don't have those budgets. We want our stories told. We want the international luxury customer to know us, shop us, love us, but it's really hard for us to do that sitting in an atelier in Lebanon.
Yeah.
Operationally, we don't know how to do that. E-commerce wise, marketing wise, combination of lacking resources and knowledge. They needed a platform that would do that for them. And that's who we are.
Yeah. I think it's amazing because it's kind of flipping the traditional fashion industry on its head, because typically when you look at all the designers, I mean, I can't speak for all designers. I don't know all of their stories, but there's been a lot of who being from the right family or meeting the right people, having the right contacts. But you're right. If you're in the middle of, I don't know, Timbuktu, you could be a phenomenal designer, but you don't have these kind of connections. So I think it's really changing the face. And you're right, what you said. The designers are great, but there are more and more people that they like their staple designer handbags and shoes, but clothing wise, I think it's really, really changing. They suddenly don't need a name that they recognize.
No. And I think we're seeing that the real luxury customer wants things other people don't have, don't know about. They feel great when someone says, oh my God, where did you get that? And it's not obvious because any luxury brand, you know it's that brand, right? So it's a conversation starter. And you're exactly right, where by no means am I saying luxury brands are irrelevant. No, but the modern customer likes to mix known and unknown. Yeah. And I think that is the new way of dressing and shopping.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's a price point thing there as well, because obviously I've been through your whole website. And I think it's much more accessible because you've got really, really high-end pieces, but then you've also got pieces that are, I say affordable. Okay, they're not high street, but no. They're above high street, but below designer prices. Yeah. And they're beautiful pieces. You can still wear something a little bit different, but it's not going to cost you £3,000 for a dress or £2,000 for a dress. So I think that's also, I think that market was very untapped. The people who couldn't quite afford designer, but kind of had the budget to go above high street, there was like this little market between that and wanted something more.
No one wants to call that mid-market because that sounds really unappealing. Yeah. But I call it modern luxury, where I also think a lot of people would agree that some of the, known luxury brands have increased their prices so much that it's honestly become silly. And even those top spenders at other, at the Farfetches will, think a little bit more and say, is that really the value of this dress? And I think, the shopper is starting to realize that luxury and price, essentially price does not inform if something is luxury. It's quality, it's design, it's uniqueness. But I guess going back to your point, we're tapping into the aspirational luxury customer, let's call them, and the luxury customer on both ends, which is really interesting as a value proposition. And they're both looking for unique pieces. 40% of what you can see on Cult Me is unique to us. Yeah. And that's a big focus. Really having something different, something special. And we've taken the time and done the search around the world for you to find the coolest up and coming brands that tick your values boxes.
How do you find them?
Ooh, I like that question. So we have found that the most effective way to uncover kind of these hidden designer gems is to partner with B2B sourcing partners. So by that, I mean working with the equivalents of the BFC in different regions, because they all have next gen talent teams on the ground. Yeah. So they're uncovering the coolest designers coming out of Lagos Fashion Week. They're vetting them, they're seeing the quality, etc. So we have a great pipeline coming from these B2B partners. But then there's also the traditional, you know, Instagram scout and find, and you just find it. So I think we look for routes of like amplified reach versus targeted search as well, but also our community. Yeah. A big part of the Cult Me offering is asking our customers in our community, you know, to like, tag, and share the brands that they want to see on the platform, and we'll bring them home, because we've all had that moment where we're on a holiday. I don't know, maybe we're in Marrakesh and we come across a boutique or a brand and you're like, this is incredible. You can only find it in the souk. Yeah. And we want to be the place you think of to say, hey, bring this brand or this boutique online for me.
Yeah. And I think that's an interesting point. I was actually on Instagram the other day and I saw the most unbelievable dress, like Pat Bow style, but not Pat Bow price. And because it was like $200 or something. And I messaged them. I said, that's the most beautiful dress. How do I order it? And they said, oh, we're really sorry, we don't ship. And I was like, why? And it's like, well, they can't. Yeah. They don't have the operations, the infrastructure, the money to be able to ship worldwide. And I think a lot of people don't take into account, like, actually, that's quite an operation to be able to do that.
No, cracking international logistics in a cost-effective way, I think either makes or breaks marketplaces or online shopping businesses. But now you know who you can forward that brand to.
I'm forwarding that on to you, because that was amazing. I love that. So interesting. So going back to, you finished your MBA and then you joined an accelerator program. Was that within London Business School?
Yes. So I applied to join LBS's incubator program, and you can join for the year following your graduation, and they take 10 or 11 businesses every year. Went through that program during COVID, but it was a great kind of online community and support system to have. Gave us a ton of resources. It's one of those incubator programs that takes no equity, which is quite rare.
That is very rare.
So it's a non-dilutive support system, up to £200,000 of different types of resources, which is mega when you're starting your business. And I felt that I could still benefit from a structured process to think about scaling the business in that first year, because sometimes you look at the drawing board and you're like,
where do you start?
Where do I even start, essentially? Yeah. So I felt that reassurance of having that kind of hand-holded first year, specific milestones, checkpoints to work towards, support in building out the initial team, and a community of other founders in the exact same shoes that I was wearing, but weren't competing with me in any way. So we really leaned in and helped each other through those initial stages, just silly things like, who's your accountant? You know?
Yeah, just having a community makes a huge difference. But I also think I think it takes being able to put your ego aside as well, because from an outside perspective, you graduated from Stanford University, you worked at Goldman Sachs, UBS, the UN, and then you went back to school. And then you just, even after studying an MBA for 24 months, you've then decided to go into a structured environment to even learn more, which I think takes a lot of discipline as well, because a lot of people will be like, I mean, clearly I have an idea, I'm very intelligent, I can go out and do it. So it must take quite a bit of discipline to be able to, I don't know, like wait in a sense. You kind of had to slow yourself down. You had all these ideas, but you wanted to make really sure
Yeah.
that you had the structure in place.
And I think what I've learned is the idea gets you going, but the success of a business is not the idea, but the execution. And I knew I needed support on figuring out the right execution for the business. And I think LBS has been hugely, hugely important to that process.
Yeah, I mean, after my 1-day course, I was like, what would I be capable of if I was able to sit here for 12 months? Even if I had 3 months here, what would I be capable of? Because the stuff I learned then, I've run a business for 5 years. And so I thought, well, I'll go and I'll see. And I was like, well, half of me was like, this is amazing. The other half was like, I should have known this stuff before I started a business.
Yeah.
I think it's great that schools are recognizing that there needs to be some formality and structure and training around being an entrepreneur. Because like you said, you can have a great idea, you can be a great salesperson, you can pitch it. I mean, look at the VC landscape. How many people have raised $20 million or pounds and they're in TechCrunch and you think, oh, they've made it. But the execution is so poor and they drown and it never comes to anything. When really, if they'd had the right guidance, they may have been able to make it.
Something super interesting that I discovered, I was invited back to my high school in April to talk to the high school students. And they introduced the entrepreneurship and leadership program at my high school for high schoolers. There's like a little Shark Tank going on. And at first I was like, that is crazy. They're like 14 to 18 years old. And then I realized, why not? Teach people to be entrepreneurial from that age. So I think we'll find that schools, to your point, not just at kind of the post-grad level, but starting at a much younger age, are focusing on giving everyone, even if you don't want to be a founder, but have that entrepreneurial thinking.
Yeah, and
early
I think
on.
it broadens people, because when I didn't go to university, and when I was looking at universities, I was thinking, well, what do I want to do? And I thought, well, one day I need to be my own boss. But in the interim, I just want to earn loads of money and do sales. So I was like an out and out salesperson. But I was like, why would I go to university? They're not going to teach me how to do sales.
Have you read The Case Against Education?
No.
Ooh, it's super interesting.
Yeah.
It's super interesting. I'm
give
not
it a
the right
try.
case study because I've clearly
You are
done
very educated.
a lot of education. But I think, to each your own path. And probably the most successful people I've met have not had, the same educational trajectory. And I think the future will see, not everyone, or much fewer people will be going to uni, much fewer people will be doing post-grad degrees, because I'm not trying to contradict myself. I think all of my experiences have been great, but there is nothing like learning on the job.
I agree. And you kind of have to, it's like my grandpa always says, he went to the school of hard knocks.
Yeah.
And he was in the fashion industry, and he was in his van at 5 o'clock in the morning with fur coats in the back, driving around.
Yeah.
And he was like, I learned the hard way. It was freezing cold, middle of the night, I got up. So I do think
100%.
so. But at the same time, I think there's now a world where you can see the two marry up very well as well. It doesn't have to be education or entrepreneurship.
No.
I think that the two can actually go together extremely well. And if I had a child, I would probably encourage them to go to university, but equally I would encourage them
To get work experience as much as possible.
Actually try.
Yeah.
My first business was not as sophisticated as yours.
Oh,
It was really embarrassing.
now I need to know.
I was 13 years old, and me and my best friend, we wanted to go to a spa. I don't know how we got that idea at 13, but I want to go to a spa. So I said to my dad, can I have the money? And he was like, absolutely not. I'm not paying for you to go to a spa.
At 13.
My mum was like on my team. She was like, oh, go on, please. Let her. And he was like, no, you got to earn some money. So me and my friend were like, what can we do that's going to earn us loads of money? We were incredibly deluded, by the way. So we were like, well, it's summer. Let's put bikinis on and do a car wash.
Love it.
Except we didn't look 13. We looked about 10 because we hadn't developed. In fact, we went to John Lewis to get measured for bras, and they said, we don't have your size.
That's so
We're
funny.
like, are you sold out? And they were like, no, you don't have any breasts.
You're not here yet.
So imagine these two children in high heels, my mum's high heels, and we're like sexily washing cars, and we're like, who wouldn't pay for this? We did not make £1 because people are like, who are those weird kids in their bikinis making? So like the spirit was there.
The spirit was all there.
But the execution, yeah.
I think we can just say it was a premature business. Too early.
And
Too early.
Yeah, and I think if anyone had stopped and enjoyed it, there would have been something wrong with that. Yeah, that's not quite right. But yeah, I understand that. And I think now being able to have both, I look back and I think I wish I'd gone to university, and I never thought I'd say that. Yeah. It's never stood in my way. But at the same time, I think, I could be capable of more now had I gone to university.
There's also executive MBA programs, which are all built around, amplifying your existing work experience and coming back to education. I think that's super interesting.
Do you know what? I think there's a lot of people in my camp. So there's your camp and my camp. You went to a top university. You've got great education. And then there's people like me who were told that they weren't built for education and they weren't right for it. So I was like, not my parents always encouraged me, but my school actually said, you should leave. You're not going to do very well.
Well, it's time to change that.
I mean, I still have like repetitive nightmares of being in an exam room and then not being able to fill in a piece of paper. And I'm 34 and I've taken an exam since I was 17 and I still have nightmares.
I think we all have nightmares about tests though. It's just like...
Except you passed yours and I didn't pass any of mine. But I think it's...
But you're here with a 5-year-old business, so...
That's true, but I think it would give me, if I got a PhD or something... And I was like, my name is Dr.
Yeah.
Green. I'd be like, that was so not my trajectory. I love that.
Fair enough.
But yeah, we digress. So you went into this accelerator probably with like very different types of businesses involved.
To be honest, I felt a little bit like the girl with the silly fashion business idea because everyone in my cohort was, planning to set up the first camp on Mars and to solve all the biggest global problems.
That's not a quick return though, is it?
It's not a quick return. And it was really positive to see when we did a big VC pitch to end the program that Cult Mia came out as the winning business.
Amazing.
And they were like, I can see this business, taking off tomorrow. You understand your market, you understand your customer, you don't need a whole lot of money to test your business idea out. You have traction. Let's see where this goes. Having that external feedback and validation really gave me the confidence to build the business full time. To me, it was really important to not just say, hey, I think this is a good idea, but to have others validate that alongside with me.
So did you, in terms of when you were preparing to pitch, did that involve a lot of market research and
a lot of market research, but I think a lot of the early days and sounding out your business idea, it's also trying to see what is the fastest way to get real traction and to get real data points that show that people actually want your product.
Yeah.
And getting to that MVP stage during the incubator program was a huge and fast learning curve. So it was a combination of market research, but also market testing as well.
Yeah. So, okay. So you won the accelerator. So how much money did you initially raise?
So in our first pre-seed investment round, we raised $400K.
Okay, nice.
And then in our seed investment round, we raised $2.8 million.
Love that. And then when you received, so you receive your money, not all of it, it comes in tranches, right? Or did you just get $400K in the bank?
I pretty much got the money, from different investors wiring it, but around the same time. Okay, so you see the bank balance change and you're like, wow.
Oh, is it tempting to just run away with it?
Wow. You're like, refresh.
Yeah.
I remember the first time I got a big check deposited, I just stared at the bank balance on my laptop and I was like, this is cool.
Your bank must have called you and been like, there's been a problem. You've had the reverse of fraud.
Who's sending you all this money? Yeah.
So you get the money. I think a lot of people hear about entrepreneurs raising money and they think, okay, that's great. Where did it start? What happened? What was day one? What did you spend that first amount of money on?
So for a business like ours, we have two big costs, let's say, marketing and people.
Yeah.
The actual running of the platform, scaling of the platform, we've built to be super, super lean and cost efficient. It's only 15% of our turnover,
Really?
the operations of the business itself. So I was able to hire a few people to support me with the business. And we actually had a marketing budget.
Wow.
So we started running, paid marketing on paid social. So Instagram, Facebook, started playing around with Google as well. Started working with our first influencers. So we took quite a conservative approach. I really felt like although we started receiving investment at the earliest days and still today, like, what can we do with the mindset of outperforming results versus capital spent? So really showing efficiency, because I knew that some of the biggest platforms in our space had grown at all in any cost with no, plans to be profitable. And I felt like the pendulum would swing and investors would really start to hone in on, which businesses are going to break even, which businesses are actually going to return something. So really getting into that headspace of doing a lot with a little was how we approached kind of running the business and being super, super capital efficient.
And were you quite nervous entering into a market which is very
crowded,
but also like it's very public that a lot of, whether it's marketplaces, e-commerce platforms, direct fashion websites, a lot of them aren't making it.
Yeah. I mean, it was very crowded when I started and it's much less crowded now.
Because they failed.
They have failed.
Yeah.
But I think what's interesting is to understand why they failed. I really believe a multi-brand online shopping platform is a good business. It's a good business if you stick to the pain point that you're addressing or solving for the customer. It's a good business if you speak to the customer and you don't try to be everything to everyone. And it's a good business if you also don't, get distracted and start buying different technologies, different companies, and you kind of stick to your core business as well. Essentially, that's a long way of saying that. Because you can be profitable and you can scale. So I wouldn't say I feel because other businesses have failed in the space that it's not a good space to be in.
No, but it's definitely a nerve-wracking. When I imagine an e-commerce website, I imagine like, okay, you get an order, you do a happy dance, and you're like, yay, money. But then the flip side of that, when you're sitting there and nothing's happening, I don't know if you ever had times like that.
So I think when you start a business, probably any business that you need to acquire customers, you think because you have said, we're open, we've launched, that like everyone is going to run and buy from you. And you realize it takes time. You need to build a brand that people like and eventually love and would be devastated if your company shuts down. That takes time. You need to develop inherent customer loyalty. You need to be smart about popping up in the right places so that you acquire customers in an efficient, cost-efficient way. But, I think when you get these different levers right, there shouldn't be days where no one's coming. Those should be in the early days.
Yeah.
And then the challenge is to make sure that they come back and spend more with you when they do.
But that's hard.
And come back more often.
Like to get brand identity. I can imagine if it was you and you were speaking to each customer, building that loyalty is much easier because they're like, okay, I like Nina. But essentially you're relying on the brand. It's not a person. And that must be way more difficult because from a consumer perspective, I'll receive an email like, hey, it's summer or something that
Yeah,
you
yeah,
get.
yeah.
And you're like, okay, great. And you have a look. Okay, I like it. I don't like it. But arguably, if you had more of a personal connection to it, you'd be like, oh, I need to check this out. It must be very difficult to get marketing right.
I think how I look at it is the product needs to speak for itself. And I think if you have the right product, it cuts through the marketing noise, because people will see a rainbow mohair coat for an incredible price of incredible quality and say, I absolutely need this.
Yeah.
And I can only find it on Cult Mia, so I'm going to get it from there. What else can I only find on Cult Mia? All these amazing pieces that people will stop me on the street and say, where did you get this?
Yeah.
I got such an incredible email from a customer who's now become a friend, who said, the feeling I get when I walk into a party, because, you know, I'm not necessarily the most socially confident, and people tell me how amazing I look and how unique it is. And I tell them that actually this was, you know, hand beaded in Egypt, and the brand supports, you know, women coming out of prison, and it's a charity. And there's this feel good moment as well about sharing the story behind my beautiful piece. Thank you, because, you know, that feeling really sticks with me. And I think you can communicate that feeling through the right product without it being related to a person.
That's true. So the first time that I discovered, it's really interesting interviewing founders when I already knew the brand for a long time, because I guess I've known about Cult Mia. It must be at least a couple of years. And the first campaign that I ever saw was, I think it was a woman in a silver top.
Oh, I know.
Yeah.
Diamante top?
Yes.
Okay.
And I saw it, I was like, oh, that's amazing. And my immediate reaction was like, A, I won't be able to afford that. Or B, it's one of those dodgy websites. You know, like where they're based in China and then you go on Trustpilot and it's like, do not trust, it's a scam.
Yeah.
Obviously that's not you. You are neither of those things. But I see what you mean though, because the second I saw it, I was like, oh my God,
wow.
Look at that top.
Yeah. And I think the other feeling you can get on other shopping websites is you just like are scrolling tirelessly and it's just so sterile. It's so boring. There's no good curation. And we like to deliver the opposite feeling, right? But hopefully we're really focused on an excellent e-com experience where you shouldn't think we're shady. But I think that's one of the value we add to some brands who really haven't been able to build out their e-com. And if someone did land on their website, they'd be like, not sure if I trust you. So that's obviously an online shopping pain point when it comes to a brand you've never come across. And hopefully we're solving that for a lot of brands. And on the price point side, yes, we have expensive pieces. Yes, it's not cheap, but I like that kind of modern luxury price point.
Yeah.
Lower than that, yes. Like I think we all appreciate having pieces from kind of the high street. But when it comes to quality and you know, pieces standing the test of the standing time, I don't know. I'm trying to say something.
Withstanding the test of time.
Yes, that's the one. You know, you need to invest in those investment pieces.
Yeah, I agree. And what are your thoughts on, because obviously you've raised VC funding, and I think people assume when you raise one round and then a measure of success is, okay, how many rounds do you go through? But I've actually met a lot of founders who took VC funding for maybe 1 or 2 rounds, but then just became insanely profitable themselves and didn't feel the need to keep, you know, diluting the shares of the business and giving equity away. Obviously, it's very hard to judge for any e-com business. It depends what you're doing. But for you personally, you might not want to reveal this yet, actually, but do you see yourself as that round D, series D, E, F, G, or do you want to get to a point where you're like,
yeah,
I don't want to keep raising money, and I can do this without that?
Yeah. I mean, look, as a founder, I want to own as much as my business as possible. It's a business that I want to see through, that I want to grow. At the same time, and I don't have a personal answer to this question actually yet, because I think a lot of things change when you're growing a business. But for any founder out there, or whenever you're thinking about fundraising, there's two, I guess, trains of thought. Raise a lot of money so that you can get as big as possible, as quickly as possible. And do you want to be a smaller shareholder of a much bigger business? Potentially. Or do you want to be a bigger shareholder of potentially a smaller business? Because at the end of the day, yes, you can reach profitability, but normally if you've only gone through 1 or 2 rounds, the cash flow you're getting back is not what I would say proper growth capital to keep scaling at the rate that you would get from a VC. So it really just depends on what growth trajectory you want. And yes, the piece of the pie will be different, but the pie could look dramatically different in terms of size depending on the type of funding that you take on. I see that sometimes founders see getting through different funding rounds as a bit of a vanity metric, right? Like,
that's what I'm thinking.
You think that business is more successful because they went through all these funding rounds. I don't agree with that. I think, like the fundamentals of the business will speak for themselves. And at the end of the day, I guess my answer is I'll take the route that gives me the biggest chance at optimizing the size of the business, but holding on to the business as well.
And when you were in London Business School and you were, thinking of Cult Mia, what was your initial goal? Were you thinking, right, I want to make this a £5 million a year business? Or were you immediately like, I want this to be a £200 million business? Like, what were your goals then versus now, I guess? Have those changed?
I want our business to be the biggest independent fashion destination in the world. I definitely have huge ambitions for Cult Mia. Turnover-wise, I want us to be enormous. I think you need to dream big to get big.
Yeah.
But at the same time, if I exit the business and we're not a unicorn company, I would still be really proud of what we've achieved, And I think you just kind of have to look at the biggest ambition and enjoy the ride as much as you can. And there's a lot of factors that play into how big you get. Timing is a big one. If you're growing your business at the right time, the level of funding that you receive, the execution, etc. I'm digressing a little bit, but I won't deny that I don't want us to be absolutely huge.
So if someone offered you 500 million tomorrow, would you sell it?
Ooh. It would be tempting. It would be very tempting to say yes.
But the fact that your immediate answer wasn't yes says a lot.
Yeah.
That your dreams are so much bigger. Because for me, if someone said that to me, I'd be like, yes, run, beach. But the fact you were like, well, I could get bigger than that, I think is like the secret ingredient behind a successful unicorn.
I hope we can get bigger than that. But also, I can't imagine doing anything else. Like I truly, and I'm not just saying this for the podcast, I truly love my business. I love my job. I don't want a different job as well. And I feel like we're just getting started.
Yeah.
I really do. But hey, that's why I said, ooh, it's very tempting. Like,
yeah, I bet.
How could you turn something like that down?
So in 3 years, when you're hundreds of millions of pounds in profit, I'm going to dig out this episode and I'm going to be like, I interviewed her. Yeah. She said yes to
that
me.
Would be a big win.
For both of us.
That would be awesome.
Exactly. And I wanted to ask you, I know this is a bit of a new area for you, but angel investing is something you're doing, which you mentioned makes a lot of sense, which I totally agree, because it seems that all the ingredients are there for someone who can make a really good informed decision, but at the same time use their gut, because you kind of need both, right? You need the informed decision and the sensible parts, but then you need a gut a gut intuition, like I back this person as well as their idea. So you've started with Alma Angels. Is that kind of your network? Can you just sort of explain how that works?
Yeah. Essentially, time is the one thing I don't have. So working with an angel syndicate like Alma is super helpful because you have support in receiving deal flow, you have support in the due diligence process, you have a community to discuss investment opportunities with, a very well-versed and bright community. So that was kind of why I decided to join Alma Angels as kind of my first step into angel investing. Why am I angel investing? And just to clarify, I haven't yet made my first investment, but I am excited to. I think women should be supporting women, and Alma Angels focuses on female founders. I think beyond capital, there's a lot I can offer to female founders during the early stages of growing their business, not necessarily sector experience, but just, that support system during that initial building phase is something that I know, I've been really lucky to have the right support systems, but, they're difficult to build, they're difficult to find. And I'd like to kind of share the knowledge and spread the word however I can. And also as a founder, I think it's really, really interesting to just understand what other businesses are up to and what other founders are up to as well. And sit on both sides of the table.
Yeah. I think that's really interesting. And I think a lot of people don't know how much, like to be an angel investor, typically how much is there like a low end, a high end? Can it be anything? If someone comes to you and says, I really need £50,000 and I only need £50,000 to get off the ground. Is that something?
You could give someone £1,000.
Okay. So it's
literally. Yeah. I think most of the investments have a minimum of, it could be even £500 sometimes,
really?
£1,000.
Okay.
They're not big tickets that angels write, at least in most syndicates. The syndicate themselves might raise a total of 500.
Yeah.
That's 550K. But that would be divided amongst, maybe up to 25, 50 people.
Gotcha.
So I think it's a way to give without overexposing yourself. It's also making investing way more accessible.
That makes sense.
So I think it's great and more women should get involved.
I agree. When I have more money, I will get involved. I just wanted to quickly touch on your relatively new mummy.
Yeah.
You have a 10-month-old little girl. How is your journey in entrepreneurship and being a first-time mum?
Yeah.
Both two of the scariest things that you could possibly do.
Something that I kind of have decided to externalize very proudly is that I'm Bella's mom first, before being a founder. And I felt that at least around me professionally, not enough moms were saying that.
Yeah, it was very much either or.
Either or. And if I had to pick, it's Isabella, right? I won't hide behind that. But at the same time, I think a lot of moms feel like if they don't say it's all work and no family, that means that they won't succeed professionally or they won't succeed as founders. And I actually feel like having a daughter has given me more fuel than ever to be as successful as I can be for her, for our family. It has really kind of given me the inspiration that hopefully, she'll admire what I've done and it will pave a way for her to think that she can do whatever she wants professionally too. Having said that, it's hard,
Yeah, I bet that's really hard.
It's hard. From the moment I open my eyes, I'm on and I'm trying to just optimize my day to fit as much as I can in. But you learn to work smarter because you do have hard stops, there's bath time, there's bedtime, and work needs to fit around it.
And then you've got like a whole husband as well.
Yeah.
Who can't be ignored either.
He also exists.
So there's like a lot going on at once.
It's busy. And I think at different points in your lives, you will have to prioritize different things. So maybe it's not the most social time of your life, and your friends will understand because weekends are about the family.
Yeah.
Maybe there'll be more intensive work periods, and hubby will have to understand, and he's super supportive. You can't do it all and be everything to everyone all at once.
No, and I think that's the perception, is so many women are putting it out there that they are all those things all at once, and it's putting pressure on other women to feel as though that they're nailing it. It's like when I had Venetia on and she was talking about Ruby, and obviously she's just had another baby. But she was saying, sometimes I'm going to drop a ball here and I'm going to drop a ball here, and I'm okay with that. It's a juggling thing.
And each day will be different in terms of which ball you choose to pick up. And I think you have to be okay with that. Yeah.
I agree, because I mean, I hear a lot about like, oh, I have mum guilt, I have this. It's like a big topic that everyone talks about. And I think
it's real. It's real.
Yeah. It must be difficult. But at the same time, you can't be there all the time, always. Like as a mum, I mean, if you want to be great, but I'm saying like, there are a lot of people that have more aspirations than just being a mum.
And I think you have to be really honest with yourself. And I love Isabella. I just said, she's my number one.
Yeah.
She's my number one priority. But I also know that I love working, and I probably wouldn't bring the right energy to her if I was just sat at home all day.
Yeah, unfulfilled, watching Miss Rachel or something. Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that's the right setup for everyone.
No,
I just think you just need to decide what is the right balance for you.
Absolutely. And advice. This is a hard one because it's very broad when you ask someone what advice would you impart. But let's say we have a young woman listening or watching this podcast, and they have an idea and they're scared and they don't know how to start. Whether that be because they don't know how to approach an investor, or whether they think this is too risky, or I just can't do this. Because there's a lot of I can't do this, imposter syndromes. It's a sad statistic, but more women than men do have it. It is proven. What is your advice to other women who have the same aspirations that you've had, but obviously you've had the get up and go to really fight?
I would say look for a mentor who has been there and done that in terms of what you want to do. My first manager at UBS had 3 kids under 10. Ooh. She was a managing director in her 30s, which is super senior. And she went to London Business School. She did her MBA. She was one of the first investors in Colt Mia.
Wow.
She has really been the most incredible role model. And seeing, I guess, having a very clear and close example of someone who, in my mind, had been there and done that, gave me huge amounts of reassurance that there are incredible women out there that are able to do even more than what I even wanted to do. You know, I don't have 3 kids under 10. That sounds wild. Something to look forward to.
Oh, it doesn't sound fun.
But, you know, very simple advice. There are women out there who have paved the way.
Yes.
And hopefully you'll be surprised that if you ask them, they will say yes and they'll support you back because they've been along that bumpy journey. But if you don't ask, there's no way of getting that support.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that. I think it's important to have someone you can look up to and think, if they did it, why can't I?
Why not?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay. Why not?
Well, I loved that. I loved all of that. I can't wait to see where Colt Mia goes.
Thank you.
It definitely feels like all the ingredients are there for a huge success. You're definitely a girl boss. And I'm going to watch on the sidelines whilst asking for a family and friends discount.
Right back at you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nina.
This was a lot of fun.
It was. Thank you.
Thank you.